Hi guys, this video is going to go on our Wheels in Japan playlist and also our How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist. We've mentioned on previous videos about driving in Japan, talked about parking and the difficulties of parking, and in one video in particular we suggested that unless you really either live in a country area of Japan or some area where you really need a car, usually a car is more of a liability than anything else. So we've sort of touched on the parking thing a few times and mentioned that, you know, parking's a bit of a thing and it's expensive and it's annoying and so on. But probably not enough detail, because there was a message came from someone recently telling us that they wanted to rent a car in Japan, and we've sort of covered all that, but particularly talking about the parking. So I wanted to cover that. So a few things. One is, if you want to own a car in Japan, then you're going to need somewhere to keep it. If it's a K car, if it's a small car, yellow plate car, then you won't need to register where it's kept, but if it's bigger than that you will, which is a whole series of paper we mentioned once before with the police to register where it is. And then usually you have to pay extra. So if you rent an apartment, for example, usually when you rent the apartment, they'll say, do you want a car space? If there's some available. Some apartment buildings just don't have car spaces available, but if there's a parking spaces available, they'll say to you, do you want to rent a car space? And if you say yes, they'll say that's an extra 5,000 yen a month or something like that, usually $50-60 a month. If you're out in the countryside or in a sort of a quiet, not busy area, if you're in the city, it could be huge. It could be absolutely huge. I mean, just insane. In Tokyo, there's car spaces for rent that cost as much a month as an apartment would in another city, you know, so it can be insane. It can be hundreds of dollars a month to park your car. So that's the first thing. Then as far as people coming here, the guy that sent us the message wanted to come here and rent a car. He had some idea of renting a car and driving around Japan. And I think we've talked before about some of the issues involved in doing that, but today we're going to try and focus just on the parking. So you can be lucky if you're traveling around places. You can be lucky. Of course, in the countryside, you can be lucky, and in the city, you can go somewhere that you want to go to visit and see the giant P, you know, the big blue and white P parking sign, and pull in there and park and pay 700 yen, 800 yen, 1,000 yen or something like that for 3 hours or 4 hours or something, so you can go and have a look at the castle or the temple or whatever it is that you're wanting to look at. So you can be lucky, but it's really unpredictable. So sometimes you'll go to a really busy city and you'll go to a museum or something in the city or some other place that you want to visit, and there'll just be parking spaces all over the place and giant big P's all over the place, and you drive in and it might be a little bit expensive maybe if it's in the city, you know, might be $10, $20, $30 for the day or something like that, but readily available close to where you want to go. So you can be lucky. By the same token, you can be really unlucky. It's really random, you know. Sometimes it depends on a whole heap of things, just the layout of the city, the time of the day of the week. You know, in particular, if you go to somewhere like a museum or some other place that's popular on the weekend and you go there on a Sunday, you can be just right out of luck, you know. And they usually have a little sign outside the car parks. Not always, but often they'll have them out there to tell you if it's full or not. And quite often you can drive around and there'll be car parks and every one of them will have the little red full sign out the front, and there's just no parking. That's really common. That is really, really common. And even during the week that can happen too. It just depends on where the place is in the city as to whether you'll get a park or not. And if you don't get a park, it can be a nightmare. You know, it's not uncommon to drive around and around and around trying to find a parking space and just not find one. Or what they often do, because Japanese people are so patient, what they'll often do is they'll have an old gardaman, and usually the old guys, the old gardaman in their uniform will stand there, and usually they don't actually tell you where to find a car park. All they do is tell you where you can't park, and that can really drive you nuts too. So you're driving around, all you're seeing is the red sign saying full, 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 and all you're getting is these old guys standing there doing this, doing the big no thing, you know, no. You try and drive in the entrance and they'll do this to tell you that it's full. And it's really frustrating because they're not telling you where you can find a park, they're just telling you where you can't park. and you can just drive round and round and round. And then what quite often happens is, what they'll often do is they'll have a queue outside the car park, and everybody will be sitting there waiting to go in, and you'll just sit there. The cars will stop and just sit there, and then you'll see a car come out of the car park and one will go in, and then everybody moves forward 3 meters and everyone sits there again and waits for another car to come out. And you know, a car might come out every 10 minutes and you're sitting there with 12 cars in front of you. You're going to be there for 2 hours, aren't you? And it's quite often what they do. Quite often they do. One car comes out, car goes in. And that can happen in the city and in the country. And because this is another thing, is in the countryside, there's no guarantee, even around here, we're out in sort of the rice fields a little bit here, but there's still no guarantee because all the space is used. You know, all the space is used. There are rice fields over here, but you can't go park there. You know, so you try and park around here somewhere. It's quite common to find, particularly if there's some sort of event going on, or there's you know, like a festival, or there's something that you want to go to. And this is the thing when you're traveling around Japan, is you want to go to the museum, and you want to go to the festival, and you want to go to the castle, and you want to go to the temple, and that's where you'll be busy. And that can be really surprising. You think that this castle or this temple out in the countryside won't have a problem, you know, won't have a problem parking there, and you can get there. Now have a look at this image here. I'll show you an image here. This is actually a car park near Gifu Castle, and we made a video recently about visiting Gifu Castle, and this is a classic example. We drove round and round the base of that mountain trying to find a park, and every one of them had the red sign up. This is actually what triggered this video. Every car park had the red full sign up, and then other car parks had the old Gardaman standing at the front doing this thing, and then other ones had the queue, and we actually sat in a queue for a little while, and we could just see it just wasn't moving, and there was just so many cars waiting, and there was so few leaving. It was still in the morning, and that's the problem. If the car park's full in the morning, then sitting there waiting for cars to leave, you could be there a really long time, you know. And so we gave up on that. And then the scene you're looking at here, we actually went down to the river. Next to the river, they had a huge parking area, and what was happening, there was no Gardaman down there. And what was happening is people were coming along a very narrow road next to the river and filing into this car park to the point where it was full. And then what was happening was cars couldn't get out because the car park was, the road behind us, the little road behind us was blocked with cars, and there was nowhere to park, and everything just came to a stop. And that often happens, and you just get stuck, and you can get stuck places. There's one place up in the mountains near here that gets the amazing autumn colours, and it's just a little town, and usually it doesn't get any traffic, but in autumn everyone goes there to see the colours, and the main road in is only 1 lane each way, and it will stop. And we know people who've gone out there to see the autumn colours, and we said, how was it? And they said, we never got there. We sat in the car for 3 hours on this little narrow road and just never got there, and in the end just had to turn around and go back. So these sort of horror stories are really common. You know, that car park scene we just showed you next to the river, we just sat there, and the only thing that saved us was that there was cars parked where they shouldn't have been in a row beside us in the centre, and between two of them there was a space of about 2 meters or 3 meters, and we managed to get this little car through that space and get around back, and then sneak our way through and around the traffic and get back out, and eventually a few kilometres away managed to find a spot beside the river in between the trees where we parked, and where nobody's supposed to park in, because that's the other thing that inevitably happens near places like this. You have thousands of people trying to park cars where there's no spaces, and what inevitably happens is people start parking illegally, start finding little corners off to the side between trees, and just little corners, little places around the place where they can park their car and just leave it there, and they're all parked illegally, but there's just so many of them that the police don't do anything about it. But even being able to do that, so sort of the point of this video is really just to let you know, because we've spoken to a few people, including one of our friends from Australia who wanted to come to Japan and rent cars, and just trying to get across exactly what that can be like, you know, and quite often it's just not worth it. it's just not worth it. I mean, we've talked about some of the other things about renting a car in Japan that are difficult, you know, the navigation and all that sort of stuff, but this is one of the biggest frustrations. And quite often if you're with a family and you live here, if you've got a family and you live here, then usually the car is the most practical way to get around. But if you're coming to Japan on holidays and you're just going to be cruising around, you're almost always better off with a train, using the trains and buses. And you know, we've got on English Friendly Japan, we've got a link to a site that you can put where you are and where you want to go, and it'll give you all the trains and buses and the times and the fares and everything all the way to where you want to go. And usually if it's only one or two of you, that usually is the best way to do it. It will usually get you there quicker, because that's the other thing. Sometimes, you know, we're supposed to be staying on the parking topic, but sometimes on public holidays and weekends and times like that, the roads can absolutely stop, and it just gets insane. And more often than not, as we've said on previous videos, more often than not, you're better off using the public transport system. And this parking issue, you know, it really proves that. When we went to Gifu Castle, there was 4 of us travelling in the car, family travelling in the car, and so we sort of needed the car. But if there'd only been a couple of us, if there'd only been a couple of adults, you know, it would have been far quicker if we'd taken trains to get to there and then walked. We would have got there much quicker than we did on the car. So, and much less stress too. You know, the public transport system here is so amazing. I mean, everybody knows that. It's not a secret, is it? Japan public transport system is amazing. And low stress. You just get on and sit there, you know, and you get to where you're going on time, and it's excellent. Whereas this trying to find a park thing, $10 to park next to that train station there, you know, this parking thing here can just do your head in. And it's irrational. One of the frustrating things about it is that they know things like Gifu Castle, they know how popular that is on a weekend. On a fine day on a weekend, they know how popular it is, and they make there's no allowance for it. There's no, you know, the private car parks employ the guardman to stand there and say no, no, no. But the actual cities themselves and the places, these events themselves, don't seem to think about the cars. They don't. It's almost like by ignoring the cars that it sort of discourages you, because you know there's a good chance when you turn up to these places that you won't be catered for. And quite often there's no signage or anything. So if you're driving the car and you're using a navigation system and you're going to somewhere you haven't been before, then the navigation system will take you to the place. So in our case, it actually took us right up to the bottom of the mountain below Gifu Castle and said, right, you've arrived, is what it says, you know, you've reached your destination. And then we got there, right, okay, and we looked around, and there's no parking signs anywhere. There's no, you know, there's no arrows saying parking over this way, parking over this way. There's no help at all. You can find parking on the Navi system, but of course, you know, it's not until you actually get to it that you find out it's full, and there's a queue of people sitting on the road waiting. So they seem to not encourage, you know, quite often you'll go to places that are specifically for tourists. You know, into Meiji Mura, we've showed you lots of these sorts of tourist places that we go to, and quite often there's no hint. You just turn up and here's the entrance and nowhere to park, and you look around and there's no hint. You go, where are we going to park around here? And you look around, you can't find it, and then you end up driving around for 20-30 minutes trying to find a car park, and then you find it and it's full. So you're probably starting to get the idea, right? So unless you have a family that you're traveling with and with little kids where you've got to carry a lot of stuff, or for whatever reason that you really, really need a car in Japan, if you don't really, really need a car in Japan, you're really better off without it, because this parking thing can be so stressful. You know, Gifu Castle, we almost gave up, and we've had places like that before. We have had places where we've given up, where we plan to go somewhere, we get there and it's just insane, and everybody's queued up waiting, and it's just insane, and we say, well, let's go do something else. And it's okay for us because we can go to that place another day, but if you're here on holidays and you've only got a limited amount of time in each place, and you know, you waste, you know, you've got one day to go see some castle and you waste 3 hours trying to find a place to park your car, you're going to be really frustrated, aren't you? So Yeah, parking in Japan, you can be lucky and you can be really, really unlucky. It's a real roll of the dice depending on the day of the week, where you are, and a whole heap of other variables, you know. So yeah, final word, use the public transport system. More videos coming soon.